This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by SDR Pods. Learn how we can build you a fully equipped sales development team to execute on personalized multi-channel prospecting and book you more meetings at the link below. It's difficult to sell into a highly regulated industry. Whether you're selling into petroleum and coal, the cannabis industry, or like my guest, the healthcare industry, regulations are constantly changing and your customers expect you to adjust and come out ahead of these changes at every turn. But if you don't have a good strategy for keeping up to date with everything going on in your industry, you're never going to build the trust you need with your prospects. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting to an expert about staying in the know and inspiring confidence in your prospects in a highly regulated industry. He earned a dual degree in computer science and business administration from the University of Southern California, where he gained a passion for process improvement and bridging the gap between business and technology. He's a producer of the 30 Seconds to President's Club podcast, and he's a business and product operations specialist at MDTech, a company that provides the most intuitive, innovative, and comprehensive enterprise solutions for physicians and healthcare organizations that leverage wireless and handheld technology. Yuan, welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sarah.
Yeah, no worries. I'm really excited to get into this. This is another episode in our series of highly regulated industries. Of course, today we're going to be talking about healthcare. So Sean, tell us a little bit about your experience and kind of where you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so just quick background. You nailed all the highlights. Quick correction, it's 30 minutes to President's Club, but same
there you
concept.
Go.
Yeah, it's a sales-based podcast where we go over basically key actionable tactics to selling and all the tips around that. I'm currently working in business and product operations at Medical Design Technologies. What we offer is a mobile charge capture application that helps physicians capture their charges at the patient bedside. So as you can imagine, in that area, there's a lot of concern around patient health information and compliance around there. So a lot of what we do is making sure that healthcare practices are able to take what they're currently doing and apply it in a more secure way so that everything is, in the event of an audit or in the event that there's things that have to do with health insurance and things like that, that's all regulated and up to code. So that's a lot of what we focus on.
Okay. So what would some of those regulations be that your clients would be worrying about?
Yeah, so a big one for us is HIPAA. That's a Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. That is all around making sure that patients have control over the privacy of their personal information and how that is regulated and shared across a different software and all the different interactions that you may come into play when you go into a hospital or going to see your primary health provider at a clinic.
Got it. And what would the kind of result be for the clinic, for the healthcare professional, if they weren't compliant with a regulation like HIPAA?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big piece to what we focus on. In the event that there are HIPAA violations, there's a number of different levels of how severe it is, and there's actually pretty large fines that are associated with, a potential leak in patient health information, and all of it needs to be audited in a certain way, so that in the event that there's a lawsuit or, there's just a general audit, you have to be able to provide all that information and say, okay, this provider saw this patient on this date, this is what they did to them. All that needs to be tracked in a way that you're able to present that in the event of an audit, for example.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about how you kind of gather all of this information. So you guys at your company, whether it's people on the kind of product side or whether it's people on the selling side, how do you go about learning about all of the different regulations that might impact your customers?
Yeah, so all of our employees are required to go through a HIPAA training so that as someone who handles that patient health information, we're not the ones that see the patients, but we have a responsibility when they're recording a procedure within our application to track all that data and everything that happens with it. It's actually pretty straight. For us, the largest part is having that in a digital space. And in a large sense, the healthcare industry is a little behind in terms of moving to a software solution type of area. So a lot of the times when you go into a hospital or you go to a medical clinic, you have a doctor that comes in, he's got a face sheet printed out, which is just your basic information, your name, date of birth, social security, all that information is on a piece of paper. They will usually jot down some notes. What we do is provide a digital interface that captures the patient profile all on the mobile application. When they're adding charges or bills for that patient, that's all done digitally. So that's in itself, moving that to a software-based system allows you to audit that data better than someone wrote it on a piece of paper and
having to sift through files and
exactly. And sometimes those things get lost, or sometimes they forget to record something. So having those systems in place is very big, and that's the big push that's coming in that industry is digitizing that whole process.
Right. And something you mentioned there is that this industry as a whole is a little bit archaic. It's a little bit behind. And that's actually something that has come up time and time again on this series. It seems that every highly regulated industry is a little bit behind. Why do you think that is?
So in terms of the medical industry specifically, it tends to be easier in a sense that you can print something off and have that information right there and jotting it down. I think that there is a gap where there's no large player that's sort of like the go-to for managing that information. And each hospital system usually has their own software from place to place. So it's difficult to sort of bridge that gap where if you went into a clinic and then they transfer you over to a hospital to do a surgery, for example, that information usually flows, sometimes over a phone call, even as simple as a phone call. They'll call the doctor that they transferred to and kind of give them the rundown. So it's sort of a matter of different systems and being able to talk to each other. So a lot of the times it's more of a manual procedure than being able to have a uniform way to do it.
Right. So it would almost take like a national or even a global overhaul where maybe governments mandate that this change has to be made to one unified software. But at the moment, every single hospital, clinic, whatever, has its own system. And so, it's kind of too difficult for each of them to change to one universal software.
And there are systems in place and regulations in terms of how that information is being kept. But a lot of the times, each system sort of keeps things in a little bit different way. And that's a lot of what we provide through MDCoder is a sort of third-party uniform system where we can talk to all these different systems. So a healthcare providing clinic that might go to multiple different hospital systems, they would use our application since we have interfaces with all those different systems so that it's all in one platform. You can track it all in one way, and then we would push that data out to however they want to track it in their individual hospital systems.
Got it. So you mentioned that one of the ways that your company and every employee at the company stays up to date on the regulations is this training that you guys have to go through. What about kind of on an ongoing basis where if there are changes to regulations or if there are different regulations coming up, how would you stay abreast of those changes? Where would you look for those changes?
Yeah, so we use a software called Definitive Healthcare, and that is basically, it's like almost a Google for hospital systems and different compliance things that come up over a period of time. There was the most recent big change was from ICD 9 to ICD 10, where the way that providers were doing their coding and billing changed quite drastically. And so it's important to be able to go through that, and we always have our sales reps run through that and always keep up to date with the newest procedures and the newest codes that are coming out, different policies, and you can see from a practice standpoint where everyone is and what system they're on. So I mentioned there's lots of times they use different systems. So anytime that someone transfers from one system to the other, there's usually a bit of a gap there, and that's an opportunity for us to come in and say, hey, let's help with that process. We can help you integrate it all together so that it's a smooth transaction.
Yeah. Well, that actually is a great segue to my next question, which was around how you use these kinds of changes in regulation or changes in information to spark new conversations. So, yeah, why don't you kind of dive a little bit deeper on that example that you just gave us there on how you would use this knowledge that you get from this database to spark a new conversation?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes to do with, language mirroring, which is a big thing, and it's can apply to any sales environment, but it's particularly important within the medical industry because there's certain terms and processes that you have to be very familiar with. You don't have to, have the knowledge of a doctor, obviously, but you have to be able to talk the talk and be able to understand what their terms are, what their processes are, things like MIPS, which are quality of care measures, things like procedure codes, CPT codes, being able to know that one practice might call it this and practice might call it the other, and kind of speaking their language so that they understand that, we're talking about procedure codes, or sometimes they might call it CPT codes. So being able to mirror that language. And a lot of the times they're looking for buzzwords just like we are. We're trying to find those terms that are important to them. And so being able to say, hey, this thing that you're looking for is what we provide. It just may look a little bit different than what you are using. Then that's the way that we're able to start those conversations and be able to move forward with those processes.
So being kind of knowledgeable and being able to speak their language and kind of being this a partner in the kind of relationship that you have with them is more as a partnership than as a seller, so that you can kind of come in, speak to them about what they care about, speak to them with kind of knowledge and conviction, and go from there.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And what about how you kind of inspire confidence in them? So, of course, if you're talking to a healthcare provider of some kind who's thinking about working with you guys, but they, of course, are worried that they need to make sure that they're HIPAA compliant, how do you guys kind of show to them or prove to them that you are going to be compliant?
Yeah, so we have a very good technical team that covers most of the bases with security evaluations and being able to show them that, we've gone through various penetration testing, SOC 2 compliance, and are up to date from a security standpoint. And then the other thing is being able to provide, just showing them the product itself. And a lot of the times, what we do is we make sure that we understand their workflows very well and what they typically do.
Mm-hmm.
And then we compare that to, what the standard industry best practice is, and are able to sort of bridge that gap and show where we check off all the points that is important in terms of keeping that information secure. So, our application can work completely offline. We have various security measures with passwords changing every 2 months, and if you take a photo with our application of an injury or something like that, that's all stored within the application, and it never touches the actual. It's almost like a separate device on your phone, and nothing transfers to like your personal information. It's all kept in one place. And so being able to show them that, and if you have enough conversations, you sort of know what's coming and what they're looking for. So walking them through the points and then opening it up to any questions or concerns and being able to address those. It's important to know who you're talking to, from a provider or someone on the billing side or the general admin. They're all looking for different things. So knowing your audience and being able to provide the information that they're looking for is key there.
Right. So knowing whether you're talking to kind of like an end user, somebody that has more of a technical or financial background, or kind of from what direction are they kind of coming to your product?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So something that's come up time and time again for this series in particular, for other highly regulated industries, is the importance of reputation and having a good reputation as a company in this type of industry. How do you think that factors in for you guys?
Yeah, no, that's huge. I'm glad you brought that up. So within the medical industry, references are huge. So we have quite a large client base, and we're very blessed to have that. And even from specialty to specialty, when you're selling to a certain, like a pediatric client, they want to hear from other pediatric provider groups that have utilized our application in the past and seen success for their certain workflows and their terms and their compliance metrics. So references are huge for us. Being able to keep up to date and being able to see, for different specialties, how we've adapted to the times. And there's a lot of information. We tried to push all that out in blogs and release posts so that we can reference those. White papers are very big for us as well. People want to see how the bottom line's affected and how different groups that are very similar to theirs have seen success adopting our product.
Makes sense. That's actually another great segue because my next topic was going to be around marketing and kind of how they work together. So as you mentioned, you're kind of using this knowledge you have on the industry, knowledge you have on the specific different types of buyers you have to create content and kind of preempt their need for social proof or their need to for you to kind of prove your reputation to them. So in what way, and of course, earlier we spoke about how you might use a change as like a trigger for cold outreach, which would be on the sales side. How do you think that marketing and sales work together in a company like yours in a highly regulated industry?
Yeah, it works quite well. And what we tend to do is, from a marketing perspective, it's all about highlighting the common pain points that different groups might have because of these different regulations and the time that it takes for an audit, for example, that goes through. And a lot of the times in the sales cycle, they're more focused on, okay, how can we get our doctors to adopt this and, just start getting our charges in a more uniform digital way versus paper, for example. So where marketing comes into play is showing the different features that we roll out and how we're keeping up to date with the different policies and procedures that are being pushed out from the medical industry and putting that into play. And a lot of that is like the white papers and getting our different clients to do video reviews and things that go over the things that have worked for them. So that's a big push that we do, and best practices even in using the application itself.
Makes sense. So kind of equipping the sales team with the things that they'll need to kind of show what you guys can do to the clients, but also potentially kind of bringing people to you with this content that you guys would be putting out. So that's kind of the double-edged sword there that putting out content is.
Exactly. And I think with the industry where we kind of talked about, there's a little bit of a gap and it's a little bit behind in the times in a digital standpoint. And so a lot of the times it's just a matter of education and letting them know that there is a solution out there that's better than just writing on a piece of paper. So marketing is huge in just overall target audience education and letting them know that, hey, this is what you could be doing. And, this is your pain point now. And here's how this product can bridge that gap.
Absolutely. That totally makes sense. Kind of showing them that they can modernize, and then of course leveraging the strong reputation, the work that you've done with other clients in their subsector of their industry, to show them that it is something that they can do. They don't have to worry about. You're going to be compliant, and it's actually going to make things easier.
Right. Yeah. It all comes into play together.
Awesome. Any other kind of specific challenges that you think exist selling in this particular kind of sub vertical of the healthcare industry?
Yeah. So, I kind of touched on knowing your audience and being able to speak their language. And the other piece to that is just the mindset of someone that works in the healthcare industry, especially in a period of time like we are in right now. A lot of times you have to target your outreach in a certain way to reach the people that you're talking to. So from a provider standpoint, there's a lot less cold calling that goes on. Providers are seeing patients all day. They work strange hours. Some people are on nights, some people are on days. They have days off. So being able to figure out who you're talking to is extremely important. And so with doctors, like I mentioned, a lot of the outreach is through email and, leaving voicemails and following up through there, and being able to understand that, when you're hammering the phones and calling them 3 times a day, that's probably doing more harm than it is helping.
Right.
So knowing that the physicians are usually more busy with the patients, and being able to provide them with a quick and easy to absorb way of what you offer. And it is important to still get a provider champion within the organization to then push to the upper levels, the management and execs. So being able to talk to them in the sense of, hey, this is going to be making your life very easy. And instead of fumbling with paperwork, you can spend more time talking to your patients. And then from the executive level, it's how can we improve the bottom line? What systems do you have in place to remain compliant in the case of an audit? And so highlighting those pain points, and then being able to provide the product as a secondary piece to that is extremely important. And so the outreach is quite different from person to person.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So it's not only knowing what kind of sub-vertical you're targeting within the healthcare industry, but from there, who the personas are. As we mentioned, it could be a provider, it could be an executive, it could be someone in billing, and then knowing what their kind of key challenges are or pain points are. And then beyond that, another step is knowing which channels you can actually reach out to them through, because you could maybe cold call that executive and he might be at his desk, but you definitely can't call that doctor because he's going to be on,
exactly. So,
with a patient.
Right. So our outreach is very segmented and very strategic in terms of how we do our sequencing and how we do our outreach through marketing or through just your normal sales channels. It's very important, because if you kind of burn that bridge and sort of don't have the right messaging, then it doesn't stick. And doctors, I think in particular, are very careful about who you are, why you're reaching out, and, how can you help me? And if you're not able to come to them from a point of understanding of their schedule, and then being able to speak to them like you understand what their normal workflows are, then you don't have a chance there.
Makes sense. I think that comes back to that idea of being kind of this value added partner rather than just another vendor for a doctor. Doctors don't have time for another vendor. They don't want to just be sold. They need somebody that's just going to help them solve a challenge that they have.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, any last words of wisdom around selling into the highly regulated industry of healthcare?
No, I would say that, keep up to date with everything that's going on. And being able to have systems in place to make sure you're educated, and practicing talking to these different audiences will make you a lot better in terms of being able to come to them from a point of being the partner versus just here's another product and we're here. So being able to keep up to date, and there's lots of tools out there. I mentioned Definitive Health is a big one, and just going on to LinkedIn, going on to your different social media platforms, and seeing in these different groups how people are talking, and the things that is currently in an area of concern, or people that are focused on, being able to touch on those is going to go a long way, especially in the healthcare industry.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today to be a part of this highly regulated series. If people want to learn more from you, if they want to get in touch with you, where can they do that?
Yeah, you can check me out on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or concerns about, selling into the medical industry, I'd love to chat and talk it up. And then check us out at 30 Minutes of President's Club podcast.
Definitely. We're definitely going to link that so you guys can check that out. And we've actually had a couple of people now from the 30 Minutes to President's Club podcast on our show. So definitely you guys can listen to other episodes. And as Sean mentioned, they share kind of actionable sales tactics on that podcast. So regardless of what industry you're in, I think you'll find some useful stuff there. Thank you so much again, Sean, for coming on the show. And thank you guys for watching this episode on highly regulated industries.